My name is Gwen. I am 34 years old, and I work as a senior forensic accountant living in New York City. My entire family had flown out to a luxury villa in Italy for my brother's lavish, over-the-top wedding. I, on the other hand, stayed behind in my Manhattan apartment because I had been explicitly and deliberately banned from attending. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone began buzzing violently on the nightstand. By the time I reached for it, I had 47 missed calls waiting for me. When I finally accepted the incoming FaceTime request, my screen lit up with the harsh, pulsing glare of flashing blue police lights. My mother was screaming hysterically into the camera, telling me my brother was standing there in handcuffs. They expected me, as always, to swoop in and fix his latest disaster the way I always did. But this time, I refused. The choices I made that night did far more than cancel a multi-million-dollar wedding. They unraveled 20 years of carefully constructed family lies all at once. Before I continue this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stop bankrolling the illusion of a perfect family and chose your own peace instead, hit like and subscribe. The cold, hardwood floor sent a chill up through my bare feet as I sat upright in bed. My phone screen cut through the darkness of the room, illuminating the panicked face of my 60-year-old mother, Brenda. Behind her, the stunning architecture of a rented villa on Lake Como was washing in and out of red and blue strobe light from a row of Italian police cruisers. Two officers in dark uniforms stood on the marble patio, holding my 32-year-old brother, Connor, pinned against a stone pillar. His wrists were zip-tied behind his back. He was dressed in a custom tuxedo, and his face had gone completely pale with terror. "Gwen, pick up the phone and do something," my mother shrieked through the speaker, her voice echoing violently off the villa's stone walls. "You need to wire $150,000 to the hotel concierge account right this second. They're trying to take your brother away." I stared at the screen, and almost instantly my mind slipped into the cold, analytical mode required by my job. I spend my career investigating corporate financial fraud. I read the lies buried inside balance sheets, and I trace missing money as it moves quietly across international borders. So when my mother demanded a 6-figure wire transfer at 3 in the morning for a brother who hadn't held a steady job in 3 years, I didn't panic. I simply asked her what Connor had done this time. My mother shoved her face closer to the camera. "What did he do?" she yelled, her voice dripping with the venom she always seemed to reserve just for me. "He did nothing. This is all your fault, Gwen. Your brother's credit cards were declined at the rehearsal dinner. The hotel manager panicked and called the police because the final payment for the entire wedding week bounced. You are a cold, vindictive person. I know you're furious that Connor didn't invite you, but freezing his accounts to ruin his big day is sick. You're going to let him rot in a foreign prison just because you're jealous." I took a slow breath and let the accusations roll past me. Connor had always been the golden child, the handsome son who could apparently do no wrong, despite a long, well-documented history of gambling debts. I was the scapegoat, the boring accountant who was expected to quietly mop up his messes and absorb every financial blow without complaint. But the truth was, I had no access whatsoever to his personal accounts, and I certainly had no authority to freeze his credit cards. "Mom, I'm not in charge of his money," I said, keeping my tone deliberately level and calm. "I haven't even spoken to him in 6 months. How exactly would I freeze his accounts from across an ocean?" "Don't play stupid with me," she snapped, twisting the phone so I could see Connor thrashing against the officers. "He told us exactly what you did. He said you got angry over the guest list and used your forensic accounting software to lock him out of his own corporate funds. You're trying to humiliate him in front of his new family. Nia and her parents are upstairs right now, terrified. You know they're a prominent family from Atlanta. If they find out Connor can't even pay for this wedding, it'll be an absolute disaster." The pieces began sliding into place. Connor was marrying into real wealth. Naya was beautiful, sophisticated, and clearly had no idea what my brother's true financial situation actually looked like. He had obviously spun an elaborate web of lies to secure this marriage, and that web was now unraveling, thread by thread, on the shores of Lake Como. I stood up and carried the phone with me toward my home office. "I'm starting my computer," I said flatly. "Just transfer the money, Gwen," my mother cried out. "Be a good sister. Save him." I set the phone down on its stand, ignoring her increasingly frantic pleas, and woke up my dual monitors. The cold glow of the screen spilled harsh light across my home office. Skipping past my personal checking account entirely, I logged directly into my full credit monitoring dashboard. As a senior forensic accountant, I keep maximum security alerts placed permanently on my Social Security number. It's simply standard practice in my line of work. The dashboard flashed a critical warning almost immediately. A massive red banner stretched across the top of the screen, indicating a severe security breach. Someone had managed to bypass my secondary authentication layer entirely. I clicked through the alert, scanning the data with the kind of practiced, detached efficiency that comes only from years in this field. There were no tears, no emotional unraveling, just the cold, hard certainty of numbers laid bare in front of me. A staggering, entirely unsecured personal loan of $150,000 had been finalized exactly 48 hours earlier. The funds had been funneled into a brand new joint checking account bearing both my name and my brother Connor's name. The digital trail he'd left behind was remarkably, almost laughably sloppy. Connor had used my Social Security number, an old billing address of mine from 3 years ago, and a completely fabricated employment verification letter to secure the capital from a predatory online lender. He had then attempted to wire the entire sum in staggered payments to a string of international accounts: an elite catering company in Milan, a luxury boat rental service on Lake Como, and a high-end floral designer. But Connor had made one fatal miscalculation. He had triggered my automated fraud protection. My banking institution flagged the sudden influx of credit alongside the immediate attempt to wire massive sums overseas. The fraud algorithm instantly locked down the joint account and reversed every outgoing wire transfer in progress. Every single check Connor had written to the Italian vendors had bounced. That was exactly why the hotel manager had called the police in the first place. Connor had tried to fund a fairy tale wedding with money built entirely on stolen identity, and the vault had slammed shut right in his face. I leaned toward the phone, staring directly into the camera lens. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her ongoing sobbing. "Connor didn't get locked out of any corporate funds. He stole my Social Security number and took out a fraudulent loan in my name. That's a federal crime. I didn't freeze his accounts out of jealousy. The bank froze them because he's a thief and an identity fraudster." The line went dead silent for a long, suspended moment. Even the police sirens in the background seemed to fade into the background. I expected shock. I expected horror. I expected my mother to finally turn around and demand answers from the son she had coddled his entire life. Instead, her expression hardened into a mask of pure indignation. "So what?" she barked, waving her hand dismissively, as though I'd just accused him of borrowing a sweater without asking. "It's just a loan, Gwen. He was going to pay you back after the honeymoon. Family helps family. You have excellent credit and you make a fortune at that firm of yours. He only needed to borrow your good name for a few days to clear the vendor payments. How can you possibly be this selfish at a time like this?" I sat back in my chair, genuinely stunned by the depth of her delusion. "Borrow my good name?" I repeated slowly, shaking my head. "Mom, this is a felony. He forged my signature and stole my identity. The Italian authorities aren't arresting him because of some bank error. They're arresting him because he just tried to defraud multiple local businesses using illegitimate funds. If I validate this loan, I am legally on the hook for $150,000. Don't you dare use those intimidating legal words with me, she yelled, her face flushing a deep, furious red. You always do this. You always have to make yourself sound so smart just to make your brother look bad. He is your blood. He is marrying into a very powerful African American family. Nia's father is a respected business mogul. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? You need to call your bank right now. Tell them it was a misunderstanding and release those funds. If you don't fix this immediately, the wedding is completely ruined, and it will be entirely your fault. The sheer audacity of her demand left a bitter taste in my mouth. She wasn't asking for a favor. She was ordering me to become an accessory to a major financial crime, simply to protect her golden child's fragile ego. Connor had gambled with my entire financial future just to buy himself a billionaire persona, and my mother was more than willing to sacrifice me on the altar of his vanity. I made the decision, firmly and completely, that I would not let them destroy my life just to keep funding their toxic, twisted illusion of perfection. Suddenly, the camera jerked violently as the phone was yanked out of my mother's hands. My 62-year-old father, Richard, filled the screen. His jaw was clenched tight, his eyes darting nervously toward the Italian officers, who were now speaking rapidly into their radios. Unlike my mother, who relied on hysterics to get her way, my father preferred a different tactic entirely. Condescension layered with aggressive authority, always assuming I would eventually fall in line. "Gwen, enough of this absolute nonsense," he barked, his voice dropping into a sharp, hushed whisper so the people upstairs wouldn't overhear him. "Stop being so dramatic. You make more than enough money sitting in that fancy office of yours. You've got a massive savings account and you barely spend a dime of it. Unfreeze the cards, authorize the transfer, and let your brother enjoy his wedding. We'll sort out the paperwork once we're back in the States." The entitlement radiating off of him was almost suffocating. He wasn't asking me to lend them money. He was commanding me to accept liability for a federal crime, as casually as if he were asking me to pick up the check at dinner. "Dad, there's no paperwork to sort out," I replied, pressing my fingertips against my temples to fend off a building headache. "Connor stole my identity. The bank flagged it as severe financial fraud. Even if I wanted to throw away $150,000, which I absolutely do not, I can't just call the fraud department and tell them I changed my mind about a felony." My father scowled, leaning in so close to the phone that his face distorted through the lens. "You need to fix this right now, to save face," he hissed, his complexion shifting toward purple with rage. "Do you have any idea who's sleeping in the master suite upstairs? Nia comes from a wealthy, elite African-American family in Atlanta. Her father, Thomas, owns the largest chain of luxury car dealerships in the entire South. They flew here on a private jet, Gwen. A private jet. If Thomas finds out Connor is broke and getting arrested for bouncing checks, this wedding is finished. We will be the laughingstock of their entire social circle. You are about to ruin your brother's one real shot at a good future with a good family." His words ignited something sharp and furious in my chest. He was perfectly willing to let me face bankruptcy and serious legal consequences, all to maintain a fake billionaire facade for a family they barely even knew. "Secure his future," I repeated, my voice rising with a cold, sharp edge that made him visibly flinch. "You mean, like how I secured his future 10 years ago? Have you completely forgotten that you and Mom cornered me in my college dorm room and begged me to drain my entire academic savings account to pay for his high-end gambling rehab? You swore to me it was a matter of life and death. You promised, swore on everything, that you'd pay me back every single cent, and you never did." He tried to cut in, but I kept going. years of suppressed resentment finally pouring out at once. And instead of paying me back for saving his life, you turned around 6 months later and bought Connor a brand new Tesla because apparently he needed a reliable car for his entry-level job. A job he got fired from 3 weeks later. Meanwhile, I worked 3 separate jobs on campus just to afford my own accounting textbooks and finish my degree, while Connor drove around in a luxury electric vehicle paid for by your endless enabling. That was entirely different, my father sputtered, his eyes darting frantically around the courtyard as the officers began guiding Connor toward the back of their patrol vehicle. He was young, he made a mistake. We're a family, and family members make sacrifices for one another. No, Dad, I corrected him, staring straight into his panicked eyes. I make the sacrifices. You and Mom make excuses, and Connor makes catastrophic messes that you always expect me to clean up. But that dynamic ends tonight. I am not taking the fall for this. You listen to me right now, you ungrateful little brat, he snarled, finally dropping every last pretense of being a reasonable parent. If you do not call that bank, authorize the immediate release of those frozen funds, and tell the Italian police this was all your mistake, you will never be part of this family again. We will cut you off completely and never speak to you again. I will personally make sure that everyone, everywhere, understands exactly what you did. I let his hollow threats wash right over me without flinching, and while my father kept shouting insults and promising my total destruction, my fingers were already flying across my mechanical keyboard. As a forensic accountant, I knew something didn't add up. An unsecured personal loan of $150,000 for someone with Connor's abysmal credit history was mathematically next to impossible. No legitimate lender would hand him that much cash based purely on a stolen Social Security number without demanding serious collateral behind it. Something else was buried in this data, and I was determined to find it. I bypassed the initial fraud alert dashboard entirely and launched a deep, comprehensive background sweep on both of our names, pulling real-time property records, court filings, and secondary credit bureau data all at once. The system churned for a few seconds, aggregating everything. When the progress bar finally hit 100%, a new and far more terrifying alert lit up my right-hand monitor. It was a lien notification. My blood ran completely cold as I clicked open the attached PDF. It was a copy of the loan origination document from the predatory lender. I scanned past the forged signatures and the fabricated employment verification, my eyes locking onto the section labeled Collateral and Secured Assets. Connor hadn't simply taken out a standard unsecured loan. He had secured the entire debt against a piece of real estate, specifically, the sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house in New Jersey where our parents currently lived. He had submitted a fraudulent power of attorney document, falsely claiming he had the legal authority to act as the primary homeowner and authorize a second mortgage on the property. I leaned closer to the microphone, cutting my father off mid-sentence. "Dad," I said, my voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm level register. "How exactly did Connor secure this loan? Did he ever tell you?" My father scoffed, waving off my question dismissively. "Who cares about the technicalities, Gwen? He used his business connections. He's an entrepreneur. Now stop stalling and release the funds." "He didn't use business connections," I replied, pulling the forged document up larger on my screen. "He used your house. He took out a second mortgage on the New Jersey property to pay for this wedding. He forged a power of attorney and put a lien on your home." For a moment, total silence swallowed the FaceTime call whole. Even my mother stopped her dramatic sobbing mid-breath. My father's face twisted into a confused, sudden mask of panic. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly now. "He can't put a lien on our house. The mortgage is completely paid off. We own that house free and clear. He doesn't even have the deed." And that was the exact moment the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The one ultimate secret my parents had buried for years to protect their pride. "No, Dad," I said slowly, savoring the bitter irony of the moment. "You do not own that house free and clear. You don't own it at all." 5 years earlier, while Connor had been busy pretending to be a crypto millionaire online, my parents had fallen massively behind on their property taxes and mortgage payments. The bank had already initiated foreclosure proceedings against them. To save them from being thrown out onto the street and facing total public humiliation, I had quietly stepped in. I bought the house directly from the bank, paying off their entire outstanding debt in one lump sum, and became its sole legal owner. I let them keep living there rent-free, and I agreed to keep the whole arrangement secret so they could maintain their carefully curated, wealthy facade in the neighborhood. Technically, they had been my tenants the entire time, but somewhere along the way, they had conveniently forgotten that I was their actual landlord. "Because you do not own the house," I continued, watching my father's face drain steadily of all color. "I do. I bought it from the bank 5 years ago to save you both from foreclosure. Remember? Which means Connor didn't just forge a power of attorney to borrow against your property. He forged a power of attorney to borrow against mine. He committed real estate fraud, title fraud, and identity theft, all at once. He literally tried to steal my house just to pay for a wedding cake and a luxury boat rental." The realization hit my father like a physical blow. He staggered backward, the heavy phone shaking violently in his trembling hand. Meanwhile, on the cobblestone driveway, the Italian police officers were aggressively guiding a sobbing Connor into the back of their transport vehicle, slamming the heavy door shut behind him with a hollow, final thud. This was no longer a simple bank misunderstanding. This was now a sprawling, multi-layered federal felony, and the concrete evidence for all of it was sitting right there on my hard drive. Before the transport vehicle could even pull away, a second patrol car screeched to an abrupt stop on the driveway. A senior officer, distinguished by the gold braiding on his uniform, stepped out and signaled for his colleagues to hold. The officers gripping Connor paused, leaving the heavy door of the van slightly ajar. The senior officer approached my brother directly, holding a clipboard stacked with printouts of the declined transactions and bounced wire transfers. "You are Mr. Connor?" the officer asked in thick, broken English, jabbing a stern finger toward my brother's chest. "You pay hotel with fake money, you show us real bank paper now, or you go to Milano jail. Grand theft. Very serious crime." Connor was hyperventilating by this point, his custom tuxedo rumpled and soaked with sweat. He twisted his neck desperately, scanning the chaos of the courtyard, until his eyes finally landed on the glowing phone screen still clutched in my father's shaking hand. He knew I was still on the line. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, he lunged against the officer's grip, shoving his face as close to the camera lens as he could physically manage. "Gwen, you have to press the authorization button right now," he screamed, his voice cracking under pure panic. "Tell them it was a system glitch. Tell them the money is real and that you're my accountant. Do it right now or my entire life is over." I stared at his tear-streaked face, completely unmoved by the theatrics. "Connor," I said coldly, my voice carrying clearly through the phone speaker. "You forged my signature to steal $150,000, and you committed title fraud against my house. The money was never real, and I am not going to lie to Italian authorities just to cover up your federal crimes." The fact that I now knew about the house didn't trigger even a flicker of remorse in him. Instead, he pivoted instantly into the role of ultimate victim. "Please, Gwen," he begged, tears streaming freely down his face. "If I go to an Italian prison, I lose Nia. She's the love of my life. Her family will cancel the wedding and I'll have absolutely nothing left. Do you actually want me to die in some foreign jail cell? Are you really that evil?" "I'm not the one who committed identity theft," I reminded him flatly. You did this to yourself. Ignoring that entirely, he doubled down on the emotional blackmail, dragging our parents directly into his twisted narrative. If you don't authorize that loan, the bank is going to investigate the forged deed, he yelled frantically. They'll seize the house in New Jersey. Mom and Dad will be completely homeless, Gwen. They'll be out on the street, all because you were too stubborn to click a single button. You're destroying this family. You're making our parents homeless just to punish me. His sheer audacity pushed me right to the edge of my patience. He was using the very parents he had just tried to defraud as human shields to escape the consequences of his own decisions. My father, still holding the phone, looked utterly paralyzed by the revelation that his golden child was willing to sacrifice their only shelter for the sake of a luxury wedding. Mom and Dad will not be homeless because of me, I shot back sharply. I am the legal owner of that house, and I am the only reason they aren't already living on the street. If they ever lose that home, it will be because their perfect son tried to secretly mortgage it just to buy a wedding cake and rent a boat. The Italian officers, growing tired of a screaming match conducted in a language they only partially understood, began forcing Connor toward the back of the van once again. He fought back, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage. I will ruin you, Gwen, he roared, his voice carrying across the pristine courtyard. If I lose Naya, I swear I will destroy your career. I'll tell everyone you framed me. I'm the victim here. You set me up. The heavy metal door of the transport vehicle finally slammed shut with a deafening thud, abruptly cutting off his unhinged, delusional threats. The senior officer turned toward my stunned parents, slowly shaking his head in open disgust, before firmly demanding to see their passports and travel documents for official processing. My brother had pushed me well past the point of no return. He had clearly expected me to fold under the pressure of his manufactured victimhood, but he had badly miscalculated. I was no longer the quiet sister who silently mopped up his messes. I was the senior financial auditor holding every single receipt, and I was finally, completely ready to expose all of it. While I sat there preparing to deliver the next devastating blow, my father dropped his hand, letting the phone dangle loosely toward the cobblestone ground. The screen spun dizzily, capturing flashes of red and blue police lights and the polished black shoes of the Italian authorities below. I could hear my mother hyperventilating somewhere off camera, fully paralyzed by the unfolding reality. Then, suddenly, a pair of pristine white designer heels stepped into the frame. The phone was snatched up in one swift, aggressive motion. The camera refocused, revealing the immaculate, furious face of my future sister-in-law, Nia. She was wearing a custom white silk bridal robe with the word bride embroidered across the lapel in heavy gold thread, her hair and makeup flawlessly styled for the extravagant rehearsal dinner she had just been forced to abandon. She glared into the lens with open disgust, her dark eyes flashing with the unmistakable confidence of inherited entitlement. "What exactly is your problem?" Nia demanded, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "Connor told me you had a history of mental instability and severe jealousy issues, but I never imagined you'd actually pull a stunt like this during our wedding weekend. You're supposed to be an employee at his firm, a bitter, low-level bookkeeper who's lucky my fiancé even keeps you on the payroll out of pity. And now you think you can hack into corporate accounts and freeze his assets, just because you're mad you didn't get invited to Lake Como? It's pathetic." I sat perfectly still in my desk chair, absorbing the sheer scale of the delusion radiating off my screen. My brother hadn't merely exaggerated his income to impress a wealthy woman, he had fabricated an entire alternate universe in which he was a wildly successful chief executive, and I was nothing more than his unstable, incompetent subordinate. Nia flipped her perfectly styled hair over her silk-covered shoulder, fully convinced she was lecturing some jealous nobody. "Listen to me very carefully," she sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured acrylic fingernail directly at the camera. You picked exactly the wrong family to mess with today. My father is Thomas Carter. He runs one of the most powerful corporate empires in Atlanta. We have an entire team of high-powered, ruthless lawyers on retainer who specialize in corporate sabotage and financial interference. If you do not log back into your little accounting software right this second and release Connor's corporate funds, I will personally have my legal team destroy you. We will sue you for everything you are worth. We will take your apartment, your savings, and we will make absolutely sure you're blacklisted from the financial sector for life. You'll be completely ruined before my honeymoon is even over. Her arrogance was genuinely breathtaking. She spoke with the unwavering confidence of someone who had never once been told no in her entire life, entirely oblivious to the fact that the man she was about to marry was currently sitting handcuffed in the back of an Italian police van for stealing my identity. Nia, I said, keeping my tone deadly calm and stripped of all emotion. You need to stop threatening me and start paying very close attention to what's actually happening around you. Connor doesn't own a firm. He doesn't have corporate funds. You're threatening to sue the only person who actually knows the full truth about your fiancé. Nia let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed across the villa courtyard. Oh, please, she scoffed, rolling her eyes theatrically. Save your pathetic lies for someone who actually cares. Connor warned me you'd try to spin some crazy narrative just to play the victim. He told me you always try to tear him down because you're single, miserable, and stuck in some dead-end job while he's out there building an empire. You're just furious that he's successful and marrying into real wealth and status. You can't stand that he's completely outgrown you. I looked at her beautiful, arrogant face and felt a brief, fleeting moment of genuine pity. She was about to fall from a very high pedestal, and the impact was going to be devastating. My brother had built this entire relationship on a foundation made of stolen money and forged documents. You really have no idea who you're marrying, do you? I asked quietly. Nia leaned closer to the camera, sneering. I'm marrying a self-made millionaire, she fired back. And you're just a sad, jealous woman about to get sued into bankruptcy. I let her words hang in the air for a moment. The full scale of Connor's deception was finally coming into sharp, terrible focus. He hadn't simply embellished his resume or inflated his crypto investments to win over a wealthy woman. He had stolen my entire life. He had taken my decade of grueling university study, my brutal licensing exams, and my hard-earned position as a senior forensic accountant, and seamlessly grafted all of it onto his own pathetic, empty existence. He was using my exact career, point for point, as his personal dating profile. It was horrifying. So, I replied, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. Connor told you he owns the forensic accounting firm in Manhattan? Of course he does, Nia snapped, adjusting the collar of her expensive silk robe. He built it from the ground up. He told my father all about how he navigated corporate tax audits for Fortune 500 companies last year. That's exactly why my father respects him so much. Thomas Carter doesn't let just any man marry his daughter. He respects ambition. Connor is a visionary. He even showed us the corporate lease agreement for the office in the financial district. And he told us how generously he gave you a low-level data entry job because nobody else would hire someone with your mental health struggles. Honestly, you should be on your knees thanking him instead of trying to sabotage his rehearsal dinner. I clicked my mouse and pulled up the actual corporate directory of my firm on my second monitor. Connor's name was nowhere on it, obviously, since he had never once set foot inside the building. The lease agreement he'd shown her father was undoubtedly another crude forgery, almost certainly mocked up on the same laptop he'd used to steal my social security number. The Fortune 500 audits Nia kept bragging about were, point for point, my actual case files from the previous fiscal year. My parents must have fed him every detail of my career over countless Sunday dinners, and he had weaponized my own hard-earned achievements to build himself an entire fake billionaire persona. He needed this extravagant Italian wedding to keep the illusion alive. He needed the vintage champagne, the Lake Como villa, the custom tuxedo, all of it, to prove to the Atlanta elite that he truly belonged among them. But because he was completely broke and unemployed in reality, he'd had to fund his billionaire cosplay using my credit and my real estate instead. Nia, I said, leaning closer to the microphone, I want you to listen to me very carefully. My name is on the lease of that corporate office, not his. I am the senior auditor who handled those exact corporate tax accounts. Connor doesn't own a firm. He doesn't even have a college degree. He dropped out during his second semester to go to a gambling rehabilitation facility, one that I personally paid for. Nia rolled her eyes and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. This is exactly what he warned us about, she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. He said you had a severe delusion problem. He said you constantly try to claim credit for his hard work because you can't handle your own mediocrity. You're actually sick, Gwen. You need professional psychiatric help. Now, I'm going to give you one last chance to fix your little computer glitch and release his corporate funds. If you don't, I will have my father call the bank president directly. We know people at the very top of the financial food chain. Her blind, unshakable faith in his lies was staggering. Connor had expertly weaponized the very concept of gaslighting, transforming his wealthy fiancé into his own personal attack dog. He knew that by painting me as a bitter, mentally unstable sister, Nia and her powerful family would instantly dismiss anything I said as the ravings of a jealous lunatic. It was a genuine masterclass in manipulation. You cannot call a bank president to authorize a stolen identity loan, I stated flatly. The funds you're demanding are the direct proceeds of a federal crime. If your father is even half as savvy a businessman as you claim, he'll know exactly how to read a basic credit report. Tell Connor to show you his actual bank statements. Tell him to log into his supposed corporate accounts right now, in front of both you and the Italian police. Nia scoffed, her face twisting with indignation. I don't need to check his bank accounts. I know exactly who he is. You know a ghost, I shot back, my patience finally evaporating completely. You are marrying a financial predator who is currently sitting in handcuffs because his stolen money just ran out. Before Nia could launch into another barrage of legal threats, a hand reached into the frame and violently yanked the phone away. The camera whipped sideways, briefly capturing a blur of stone pillars and panicked faces, before settling back on my father's flushed, sweating face. Richard had dragged the phone away from Nia and retreated into a dimly lit hallway, clearly trying to isolate our conversation from the bride and her wealthy family. His breathing was heavy, sweat glistening across his forehead. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, confirming that Thomas and Nia were out of earshot, before leaning in close to the microphone. Gwen, you need to listen to me, he whispered urgently, dropping his earlier aggression and replacing it with a sickeningly sweet, pleading tone. You have to play along with this, just for the weekend, just until they say their vows tomorrow and the marriage certificate is signed. You have to let Nia believe you're the unstable employee and he's the chief executive. If you just unlock the accounts and authorize the transfer, this entire nightmare goes away. I stared at him, genuinely wondering whether the stress had finally caused him to lose his grip on reality completely. Dad, are you asking me to validate a fraudulent $150,000 loan and pretend to be my brother's mentally ill subordinate so he can con a woman into marrying him? I asked, articulating every single word with sharp, deliberate precision. Don't use the word con, he hissed, his eyes darting back down the hallway. It's a strategic exaggeration. He's marrying into the Carter family, Gwen. Do you understand what that actually means? Thomas owns a $1 billion automotive empire. Once the wedding's finalized, Thomas is bringing Connor on as a senior vice president of regional sales. He'll be pulling in mid-six figures right out of the gate. He'll pay you back the money. He'll pay off the second mortgage on the house. You'll get every penny back. With interest. You just have to absorb the financial hit for 48 hours. The audacity of his proposal genuinely left me speechless. My father wasn't simply enabling my brother's criminal behavior anymore, he was actively participating in the conspiracy. He wanted me to become an accessory to federal identity theft and real estate fraud, all so his golden child could secure a lucrative job from a father-in-law he was actively deceiving. "There is no paying me back, Dad," I fired back, my voice rising enough to make him visibly flinch. "The money is frozen because the bank flagged it as stolen. If I call them and claim I authorized it, I become legally responsible for the entire debt. And when Connor inevitably gets fired by Thomas for being a fraud, I'll be the one left facing bankruptcy. Falsely claiming I authorized a fraudulent loan makes me an accessory to wire fraud. I could lose my CPA license. I could go to federal prison. You're asking me to risk my entire career and my freedom just to protect his fake ego. You're being incredibly selfish," my father snarled, his pleading tone vanishing instantly, replaced by bitter resentment. "You already have a great career, you have a beautiful apartment, you have everything you could ever want. Your brother has struggled his entire life just to find his footing. This is his one real chance to finally be successful. His golden ticket, Gwen. Why can you never just support him? Why do you always have to be the difficult one? You have the power to save this entire family right now, and instead, you're choosing to destroy us over technicalities." "Technicalities?" I repeated, my anger finally boiling over into something quiet and dangerous. "Forging my social security number is not a minor technicality. Putting a fraudulent lien on my property is not a technicality. You are perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves to protect him. You would rather watch me stand in federal court than see your son face even a fraction of the consequences of his own actions. You don't care about me at all. I'm just a disposable human shield to both of you." My father glared back at the screen, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, unapologetic cruelty. "You are my daughter," he said coldly, his voice completely devoid of any parental warmth. "But Connor is my son. He carries our family name. He needs this more than you need your pride. Now you are going to call your bank, and you are going to tell them you authorized the loan. You're going to apologize to Nia and tell her you were having a severe mental breakdown. If you refuse to do this right now, you are completely dead to me." He delivered the ultimate betrayal without a flicker of hesitation or remorse. He had made his choice, firmly and finally. And his devastating words, in turn, freed me to make mine, without a shred of lingering guilt. As my father finished delivering his ruthless ultimatum, the camera jerked sideways once again. He shoved the phone back into my mother's hands. Brenda's face filled the screen, her expression no longer frantic or tearful, but twisted into something colder. A mask of calculated malice. She had clearly been listening to the entire exchange, and seeing that my father's aggression had failed to break me, she now decided to deploy the ultimate weapon in her manipulative arsenal, my own reputation, turned against me. "Gwen," my mother sneered, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper, "you are not going to walk away from us. You have always been the one to fix things. When Connor crashed his car, you paid the deductible. When your father lost his bonus, you covered the groceries. You are the reliable one. You don't get to suddenly decide you're done playing your part just because the stakes happen to be high this time. We are your family, and you owe us your loyalty." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, keeping my voice carefully, dangerously steady. You just admitted that you expect me to go to federal prison so your son can marry a rich woman based entirely on a lie. That is not family loyalty. That's a hostage situation. My mother let out a sharp, humorless laugh that sent a genuine chill down my spine. You think you hold all the cards just because your name is on a few pieces of paper? She said, leaning so close to the camera that I could see the furious pulse beating in her neck. But you are forgetting exactly who you're dealing with. If you do not authorize that bank transfer right this second, your father and I will not just disown you. We will completely destroy your reputation. We will call every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in this family before the sun even comes up. I crossed my arms, refusing to let her see even a fraction of the disgust churning through my stomach. And what exactly are you going to tell them? I challenged. Are you going to tell them your golden child is a felon who tried to steal my house? We will tell them you stole the house from us. My mother fired back without missing a single beat, her ability to instantly rewrite reality genuinely terrifying to witness. We will tell them you used your fancy accounting tricks to swindle your own elderly parents out of their property while we were struggling financially. We will say you took advantage of our vulnerability to put the deed in your name and then deliberately froze Connor's bank accounts on his wedding day out of pure, malicious jealousy, because you're a bitter, lonely woman who can't stand to see her own brother happy. She paused, letting the weight of the threat fully sink in, her eyes gleaming with dark triumph. Who do you think they're going to believe, Gwen? She taunted. The sweet parents who just wanted to celebrate their son, or the cold, calculating accountant who refused to even show up to the wedding? We will make sure you are entirely ostracized. You won't be invited to another Thanksgiving, another Christmas, another family gathering, ever again, for the rest of your life. You will die completely alone. Her words were precision engineered to strike at the deepest insecurities of my childhood. That desperate, lifelong need for approval that had kept me tethered to their toxic dynamic for 34 straight years. They were relying entirely on my historical role as the family fixer, the obedient daughter who would always swallow her pride and reach for her wallet, just to keep the peace and avoid any kind of public embarrassment. They genuinely believed the threat of being cast out would be enough to terrify me into submission. But they had made one final, fatal miscalculation. They assumed I still valued a seat at their table. Mom, I said, my voice completely devoid of the panic she so badly wanted to hear. You are threatening to lock me out of a burning building. Do you really think I want to spend another Thanksgiving sitting across from a family that views me as nothing more than an emergency bank account? Go ahead, call every relative we have. Tell them I'm the devil incarnate. I genuinely do not care anymore. My mother's smug expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of real uncertainty breaking through. You're bluffing, she snapped, her voice rising with sudden panic. You can't handle being cut off from us. Watch me, I replied smoothly. You wanted a villain, Mom. Congratulations, you finally have one. The difference is, I'm a villain with concrete receipts, and my patience has officially run out. I will not be manipulated into funding his criminal behavior any longer, no matter how many baseless threats you scream at me. Without waiting for a response, I reached out and firmly pressed the mute button on the FaceTime interface. The sudden silence in my office was deafening, a stark, almost surreal contrast to the chaos still unfolding halfway across the world in Italy. On screen, I could still see my mother screaming, her mouth moving in wide, exaggerated shapes as she undoubtedly launched into another tirade of threats and emotional manipulation. But now her voice was completely gone, finally shutting out the toxic noise that had dominated my entire life up to that point. I didn't shed a single tear. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in 34 years, the crushing, ever-present anxiety of disappointing my parents had simply evaporated, replaced instead by a sharp, calculating focus. I was in my element now. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a forensic accounting investigation, and I was going to dismantle my brother's entire fraudulent empire, piece by methodical piece. I turned my attention back to the second monitor and opened a secure, encrypted folder on my desktop. I needed to assemble the ultimate legal payload, a bulletproof dossier of undeniable evidence that no amount of gaslighting or parental favoritism could ever dispute. First, I accessed the predatory lender's server portal using credentials Connor had foolishly routed through my own email address. I extracted the raw IP logs tied to the fraudulent loan application. The data showed, with complete clarity, that the application had been submitted from a wireless router inside a luxury hotel in Milan, exactly where Connor and Nia had stayed 3 days earlier, before relocating to Lake Como. It instantly obliterated any possible claim that some random hacker had stolen my identity from a distance. The physical location placed my brother directly at the scene of the digital crime. Next, I pulled up the forged DocuSign footprints. Connor had been remarkably sloppy, relying on automated digital signature software to forge my name across the secondary mortgage documents. What he clearly hadn't realized, though, was that enterprise-level electronic signature platforms record the unique device identifier of whatever computer executes the signature. I downloaded the metadata report, and it matched perfectly, down to the exact media access control address, with the MacBook Pro my parents had bought him 2 years earlier. The digital trail wasn't just circumstantial anymore. It was absolute, concrete proof that my brother had personally executed every one of the fraudulent documents himself. Finally, I navigated to the New Jersey County Clerk's online database and pulled up the official, notarized property deed for my parents' house. The document clearly and unambiguously displayed my full legal name as the sole proprietor and exclusive owner of the property. I exported it as a high-resolution PDF, making absolutely sure the county seal and the recording date from 5 years earlier were clearly, prominently visible. This single document was the silver bullet that would completely obliterate my parents' pathetic threat to turn the entire family against me. It proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that they had been living in my house, surviving entirely on my charity, while simultaneously conspiring to help my brother steal it right out from under me. Finally, I ran a hard credit inquiry on Connor's actual Social Security number, just to contrast it directly against the pristine financial profile he had stolen from me. The screen populated instantly with a sea of red flags: unpaid credit cards, defaulted auto loans, and outstanding collections from multiple online gambling platforms. His real credit score sat at a dismal 420. It was the financial profile of a complete and total disaster. I took a screenshot of that damning number and placed it directly beside the fabricated bank statements he had almost certainly shown his future father-in-law. The contrast was staggering. He was a complete fraud, dressed up in a very expensive, very borrowed suit. I compiled the IP logs, the digital signature metadata, the verified property deed, and his disastrous credit score into a single, comprehensive PDF document. I gave the file a simple, clinical name, deliberately designed to make it look like an official corporate audit report. This was the receipt of all receipts. This was the irrefutable truth that would shatter the billionaire CEO illusion once and for all. I checked the FaceTime window one more time. My father had taken the phone back and was now aggressively jabbing his finger at the camera, his face flushed red with fury, entirely unaware that his voice was muted and every one of his threats was landing on deaf ears. They genuinely believed I was sitting there crying, agonizing over their ultimatums, desperately scrambling to find some way to save their golden child. They had absolutely no idea that I was quietly loading the digital weapon that would end this entire nightmare for good. I took a deep breath, fully satisfied with the meticulously organized dossier glowing on my screen. I was completely ready to drop the final digital bomb, the one that would permanently destroy every single lie they had ever told about me. I kept my fingers hovering over the mouse, my eyes locked on the chaotic scene still unfolding across my screen. Before I could unmute the microphone to deliver my prepared dossier, the camera angle violently shifted again. My mother had dropped the phone onto a patio table in her panic. The lens now pointed upward, capturing the dramatic stone arches of the villa and the tense, anxious faces gathered in the courtyard. Suddenly, a towering figure stepped into the frame, instantly commanding the entire space. It was Thomas Carter, Nia's father. He radiated generational wealth and absolute authority even in his tailored dinner jacket. He didn't look angry, which was somehow far more unsettling. He looked severely, deeply disappointed. "What exactly is going on out here?" Thomas demanded, his resonant voice effortlessly cutting through my mother's hysterical sobbing and the frantic murmuring of the Italian officers. "Why is the general manager of this hotel currently standing in the main lobby, threatening to evict my entire family and lock the doors? And more importantly, why are there 2 police cruisers parked on the lawn of a property where I am hosting my daughter's wedding?" Nia rushed immediately to her father's side, her earlier arrogant demeanor vanishing, replaced by the nervous energy of a little girl seeking protection. "Daddy, it's just a huge misunderstanding," she stammered, wrapping both arms around his rigid elbow. Thomas ignored her entirely, his sharp gaze sweeping across the courtyard until it landed squarely on Connor. The Italian officers stood beside my brother, holding his zip-tied wrists, waiting patiently for further instructions. The humiliation of the moment should have crushed any ordinary person. But Connor was not ordinary. He was a pathological liar who had spent his entire adult life talking his way out of catastrophic failures. Like a switch flipping, his panic vanished completely. He straightened his posture, rolled his shoulders back, and plastered on the same charismatic, confident smile he had used to con his way into the Carter family in the first place. "Thomas, I am so incredibly sorry for this ridiculous interruption," Connor said, his voice dropping into a smooth, reassuring baritone, as though he were casually discussing a minor shipping delay during a routine board meeting, completely ignoring the plastic restraints biting into his wrists. "Please don't worry about the hotel manager. This is nothing but a frustrating corporate banking glitch." "A banking glitch?" Thomas repeated slowly, his thick eyebrows knitting together with deep skepticism. "The manager said your transfers bounced. The authorities were called because you attempted to pay with stolen credentials. That doesn't sound like a simple banking glitch, Connor. That sounds like a financial crime." Connor let out a soft, easy chuckle, shaking his head as if the entire situation were just a hilarious bureaucratic mix-up. "You know how these international wire transfers can be, Thomas," he said smoothly, taking a step closer to his future father-in-law despite the officers tightening their grip on him. "Our firm moves millions of dollars across borders every single week. Our fraud protection algorithms are incredibly sensitive. Unfortunately, my sister Gwen, who handles the lower-level data entry and basic bookkeeping for the company, made a catastrophic routing error tonight. She triggered an automated lockdown on our main corporate account." I sat in my apartment in New York, listening as he effortlessly threw me under the bus with a sickening, sociopathic level of charm. He was literally standing in police custody, facing federal felony charges for identity theft, and he was still actively trying to convince a billionaire that he was a wildly successful chief executive. "She's not particularly experienced with international tax law," Connor continued, leaning into the lie with breathtaking audacity. "And honestly, she's been struggling with some fairly severe mental health issues lately. She panicked the moment the accounts froze and failed to notify our liaisons in time. The Italian banks automatically flagged the sudden stop in funds as fraudulent. It's a massive headache. but my legal team back in Manhattan is already sorting it out. The funds will be released by morning, and I'll personally make sure the hotel manager is heavily compensated for his trouble." Thomas stared at Connor for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the courtyard grew thick and suffocating. You could almost watch the gears turning behind the older man's eyes as he weighed the bizarre explanation against the undeniable reality of the flashing police lights surrounding them. Connor held his gaze without blinking, pouring every last ounce of his manipulative charm into keeping the illusion alive for just a little longer. My parents stood frozen in the background, breathlessly watching their golden child spin the single most dangerous lie of his entire life. They assumed my physical absence meant absolute silence on my end. They had no idea I was listening to every single word, with the ultimate legal payload already locked and loaded. Thomas remained perfectly still, his sharp gaze shifting steadily between Connor and the Italian officers, clearly unconvinced by the corporate glitch narrative being fed to him. Connor knew his future father-in-law was a shark in the business world, a man capable of smelling a bad investment from a mile away. One wrong word, one slight hesitation, and the entire billionaire illusion would shatter instantly. But Connor also realized something far more dangerous in that moment. He suddenly remembered the FaceTime call was still active. His eyes darted past Thomas and landed squarely on the patio table, where my mother had carelessly abandoned the phone. The screen was still glowing brightly against the dark stone, a quiet reminder that I had heard every single word of his pathetic, elaborate lie. Panic flickered briefly behind his charming smile. He jerked his head subtly toward the table, making desperate eye contact with our father. Richard understood the assignment instantly. He needed to eliminate the digital witness before I could unmute my microphone and tear the corporate glitch narrative apart in front of Thomas himself. My father lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his age, stepping directly between Thomas and the patio table. He snatched up the phone, his thick fingers fumbling clumsily across the screen as he desperately searched for the red button to end the call. In his frantic state, his palms were sweating so heavily that the touchscreen kept refusing to register his taps. I sat in my office, watching his enormous thumb repeatedly smash against the camera lens, my view plunging into chaotic flashes of darkness interrupted by blurry glimpses of stone walls. Brenda, recognizing the immediate threat of Thomas discovering the phone, launched into a theatrical display of physical deflection. She stepped squarely in front of the towering billionaire, blocking his line of sight to her husband entirely. "Oh, Thomas!" she gasped loudly, clapping her hands together with forced manic enthusiasm. "This has all been so terribly stressful for you and poor Nia. We are simply mortified by this minor administrative hiccup. Why don't you and Naya head back upstairs to the penthouse suite and try to get some rest before the big day tomorrow? Richard and Connor have everything completely under control down here." Thomas didn't budge an inch. He looked down at my mother as though she were little more than a minor obstacle blocking his path. "I do not sleep while police officers are attempting to arrest my future son-in-law in the courtyard of a luxury venue I personally paid for, Brenda," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "I want to see the official documentation they're holding right now. I want to know exactly what kind of banking error requires handcuffs." Connor stepped aggressively sideways, physically positioning himself between Thomas and the officers. "Please, Thomas," he insisted, his voice dripping with manufactured humility. "I would never ask you to get personally involved in my firm's internal auditing issues. It's highly confidential corporate data. My sister Gwen is on the phone with our compliance department in Manhattan right now, as we speak. We're clearing the security protocols as we speak. Please, go comfort Nia. I'll be upstairs in 15 minutes to explain everything in full." The Italian officers, however, were entirely finished with the side conversations. The senior officer stepped forward, shoving Connor backward firmly. "No more talking," he barked, holding up the thick stack of printed transaction records. "You show real money now, or you go to station. We do not wait for your corporate people. This is criminal fraud." My parents panicked instantly. The delicate balancing act they had been maintaining was collapsing in real time. Richard, still failing to properly hang up the phone thanks to his sweat-slicked hands, finally shoved the entire device deep into his suit jacket pocket to muffle the audio entirely. My screen went completely black, but the microphone remained fully active. I could hear the muffled rustle of police officers, speaking in a frantic, urgent whisper. He was begging the authorities for 10 more minutes, desperately promising that they had a wealthy benefactor standing right behind them, one who could clear the massive debt instantly if they could just be left entirely alone for a moment. They were physically blocking the camera and muffling the speaker, doing everything in their power to ensure I couldn't interrupt their secondary con. Sitting in my quiet apartment, I slowly pulled my hand away from the microphone button. Unmuting my audio at this point would have been completely useless. Even if I screamed the truth at the top of my lungs, my voice would have been nothing more than a muffled buzzing sound, trapped uselessly inside my father's jacket pocket. They had effectively silenced me on the video call, but they were fighting a hopelessly outdated war. They genuinely thought that hiding a phone would be enough to stop a senior forensic accountant. I didn't need to shout to dismantle their entire web of lies. I had a different method already prepared, one that would deliver the truth directly to the man who needed it most. I turned my chair fully away from the phone, ignoring the muffled, frantic rustling still coming from my father's pocket. I dragged the fully compiled dossier of Connor's financial crimes into a secure, encrypted folder on my desktop. As a senior forensic accountant, I had access to premium corporate intelligence databases. I didn't need to ask anyone for Thomas Carter's contact information. I simply opened my firm's global directory portal, typed in his full name alongside the name of his automotive empire, and hit enter. Within 5 seconds, the system generated his complete executive profile, including his direct public business email address and his personal cellular number. I copied the email address into the recipient line of a new, highly secure message, but sending it solely to Thomas wasn't going to be enough. My father was currently standing in the Italian courtyard, frantically trying to sweet-talk the local police and the hotel manager into giving them just a little more time. If Thomas confronted them privately, my parents would undoubtedly spin yet another elaborate web of lies to explain away the documents. I needed the authorities and the venue staff to see the exact same evidence at the exact same moment. It had to be a coordinated strike, executed simultaneously. I quickly opened a new browser tab, located the official website for the luxury villa on Lake Como, and found the direct email address for the executive concierge desk. I added the hotel manager to the carbon copy line of my message. I kept the subject line short and entirely professional, typing simply, "Urgent financial fraud documentation regarding Connor," and flagged the entire message with maximum priority. In the body of the email, I didn't waste a single line on emotional apologies or family drama. I wrote with the cold, clinical precision of a lead investigator presenting evidence to a federal judge. I stated my full legal name, my corporate title, and my exact relation to the man currently being detained in their lobby. I clearly stated that I had absolutely no involvement in the fraudulent loan, that my identity had been stolen outright, and that my brother had zero genuine affiliation with my accounting firm. I instructed both recipients to review the attached PDF dossier, containing the IP logs, the forged property deed, and Connor's actual, unaltered credit history. While the attachments uploaded to the secure server, I glanced back at the FaceTime window on my second monitor. The screen was still pitch black, trapped deep inside my father's jacket pocket. However, the microphone was still picking up the chaos around him with crystal clarity. I could hear my father's muffled, frantic voice begging the Italian officers to just wait a little longer for his phantom banking liaison to call back. I could hear Connor deploying his smoothest, most charismatic tone, desperately assuring Thomas that the entire situation was nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding, all caused by my supposed incompetence. And I could hear my mother loudly offering to order more champagne for Nia, frantically trying to distract the bride from the reality of her rapidly collapsing wedding. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. They were pouring enormous amounts of energy into physically blocking a camera lens and muffling a phone speaker, genuinely convinced they had successfully neutralized me. They thought they had won. They believed they had successfully trapped me back in New York, entirely powerless to stop their glamorous Italian charade from playing out exactly as planned. The sheer irony of their ignorance was almost poetic. They were fighting a desperate analog war against a woman who already held the digital keys to their total destruction. The upload progress bar finally hit 100%. The attachment was fully secured. I took one last steadying breath, letting the calm, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat ground me completely. I was about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Pressing send meant officially severing my ties with the very people who had raised me. It meant actively participating in the arrest of my own flesh and blood. But as I listened to them casually drag my name and my hard-earned career through the mud, simply to protect a criminal, any lingering hesitation I might have felt vanished completely. They had already severed those ties themselves, long before tonight. I was simply making it official. I moved my cursor over the send button and firmly clicked my mouse. My secure corporate email client immediately generated a clear delivery tracking notification. I quietly watched the small digital icon as my encrypted message instantly bounced from my local server in Manhattan, raced through the transatlantic fiber optic cables resting along the bottom of the ocean, and landed directly in the inbox of a billionaire standing thousands of miles away. The digital bomb had officially been dropped. Now all I had to do was sit back, alone in the quiet comfort of my apartment, and wait for the explosion. As I sat watching the delivery confirmation glow on my screen, a sudden burst of light flooded back into the FaceTime window. My father had failed to properly lock his screen, and the phone was suddenly, aggressively yanked from his pocket. The camera swung wildly upward before refocusing, revealing Nia's furious face staring down into the lens. She had clearly grown tired of the men whispering with the police and had decided to take matters into her own hands. She held the phone up high, looking down at the camera with absolute disdain, completely unaware that the digital guillotine was already dropping toward her perfect wedding. "Are you still there, Gwen?" Nia demanded, her voice cutting sharply through the ambient noise of the Italian courtyard. "I want to make something perfectly clear to you before we hang up and permanently block your number. You will never actually understand what it means to be part of high society. You will never comprehend the concept of a true partnership between equals. You sit in your lonely apartment crunching numbers for other people, while Connor and I are out here building an actual legacy. You're trying to drag him down to your pathetic level because you're terrified of being left behind." I didn't interrupt her. I simply let her speak, observing her arrogant delusion with a kind of cold, detached fascination. She was so thoroughly convinced of her own superiority that she was practically reciting his exact psychological script, word for word, without even realizing it. "You think freezing his corporate accounts is going to stop this wedding?" Nia continued, letting out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "You're completely delusional. We don't even need your little routing error fixed tonight. We are legally bound together in ways you could never possibly dismantle. Connor and I already signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement last month, a massive legal contract drafted and reviewed by the absolute top family lawyers in Atlanta." Her words hit me like a physical shockwave. A prenuptial agreement? My mind immediately began racing through the severe legal implications. That's right, Naya sneered, completely misreading my stunned silence as defeat. Connor insisted on it himself. He wanted to protect his massive corporate assets and his real estate portfolio from my family's estate. He is a self-made millionaire, Gwen. He brought his own wealth to the table. He laid out his entire financial portfolio for my father's legal team. Every single investment account, every corporate holding, every property deed. He proved exactly how successful he really is. So your petty little attempt to make him look broke in front of the hotel manager is entirely, completely pathetic. The sheer magnitude of my brother's fraud suddenly expanded, in an instant, from a simple stolen credit line into a massive, sprawling legal catastrophe. To sign a legally valid prenuptial agreement, both parties are required by law to submit sworn financial disclosure documents, a strict mandate made under penalty of perjury. Connor hadn't simply lied to a woman over a candlelit dinner. He had submitted fabricated financial documents and fake corporate tax returns directly to elite corporate attorneys. He had sworn, under oath, that he owned assets that actually belonged to me. He had committed severe perjury and outright criminal fraud against the legal system itself. He had created an entirely irreversible disaster, layered on top of everything else. Naya, I said, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. Did he submit the New Jersey house as part of his asset disclosure for the prenuptial agreement? Of course he did, Nia bragged, completely oblivious to the legal trap closing in around her. He submitted the deed to the New Jersey Colonial, the Manhattan office lease, and all of the corporate investment portfolios. He laid out everything. He's fully protected from any kind of financial liability. Our marriage is built on complete financial transparency. You're the only one trying to hide things here. You're just completely jealous of his incredible financial success. I stared at the screen, genuinely horrified by the radioactive legal disaster my brother had so carelessly constructed for himself. He had actively bound his fraudulent claims into a legally binding contract with a billionaire's own legal team. The moment Thomas Carter's lawyers discovered that Connor had submitted forged documents and committed outright perjury during the prenuptial negotiations, they were going to absolutely destroy him. They were going to dismantle his entire life, and they would very likely drag my parents down right along with him for actively corroborating his lies. There was no escaping this legal nightmare now. None at all. You really think he protected his assets from you? I asked, unable to keep a grim note of satisfaction out of my voice. Nia, I need you to turn around right now. Look at your father. Nia frowned, clearly thrown by my sudden shift in tone. What are you even talking about? She snapped, her arrogant facade beginning to crack just slightly at the edges. Just turn around and look at your father, I repeated calmly, evenly. The financial transparency you're so incredibly proud of is about to be delivered right to him, on a silver platter, for everyone to finally see in perfect clarity. Nia stared back down at the phone screen, her eyebrows pulling together into a tight knot of confusion and sudden, creeping apprehension. She clearly had no idea what I meant by financial transparency being delivered, but my absolute certainty visibly rattled her. She slowly lowered the phone, the camera panning across the villa courtyard until it captured her father once again. Thomas was standing exactly where he had been before, but he was no longer looking at my parents. He was staring down intently at his glowing iPad, which a hotel concierge had just rushed out to hand him. The notification bell had already chimed, but before Thomas could even open the encrypted email I had just sent him, the fragile standoff in the courtyard finally, completely collapsed. The senior Italian police officer had reached the absolute limit of his patience. He had watched my father fumble desperately with a hidden phone. He had listened to Connor spin endless circles of empty corporate jargon. and he had waited more than long enough for the supposed banking glitch to miraculously, conveniently resolve itself. The grace period was officially, finally over. The officer stepped forward aggressively, waving his hand in a sharp, dismissive motion that cut clean through the heavy, humid night air. He barked out a series of rapid, authoritative commands in Italian to his partner. The second officer unclipped a heavy metal ring of keys from his belt and grabbed Connor firmly by the bicep, yanking him forcefully away from the protective shadow of my father. "Wait!" my father shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic as he lunged forward. "Just give us 5 more minutes. We have the money. My daughter is fixing the routing error right now." The senior officer shoved my father back with a firm, flat hand against his chest, completely unfazed by the desperate pleading. "No more minutes," the officer stated, his thick accent leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or misunderstanding. "The bank says the money is stolen. We have the official report from the hotel manager. He goes to jail now." In his frantic attempt to physically intervene, my father accidentally pulled his phone completely out of his suit jacket pocket. The device slipped from his sweaty grip and clattered loudly onto the stone patio, landing perfectly propped against the base of a heavy marble planter, the camera lens pointing directly into the center of the courtyard. The chaotic scene was now framed in full on my dual monitors back in New York. I suddenly had a front-row seat to the exact moment my brother's carefully constructed empire of lies finally, completely shattered. Connor fought wildly against the officers, the expensive custom tuxedo tearing along the shoulder seam as he desperately tried to break free. The charming, sophisticated billionaire persona he had maintained for months vanished in a single instant. He was no longer the confident executive closing international deals. He was a terrified, cornered fraudster, suddenly realizing he was about to spend the night in a foreign prison cell. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson, and spit flew from his lips as he screamed. He twisted his neck violently, his wild eyes scanning the patio until they locked onto the glowing screen of the dropped phone. He knew I was watching. He knew I held what he still believed was the ultimate power to stop the officers from dragging him toward the transport van. "Gwen!" he roared, his voice tearing through the courtyard with unhinged ferocity. "Press the button. Authorize the funds right now. If you let them put me in that van, I swear to God I will dedicate the rest of my life to completely ruining yours. I will destroy your career. I will burn your house to the ground. I will make sure you lose absolutely everything you have ever worked for. Press that button, or you're dead to me." My mother shrieked, covering her face with both hands as the steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. Nia stood completely frozen, her mouth hanging slightly open, watching the man she had believed to be a powerful corporate titan throw a desperate, violent temper tantrum on the ground like a spoiled child. I sat in my quiet office thousands of miles away, listening to his vicious threats echo through the speakers. I looked at his furious face filling my screen. He genuinely believed that fear would still work on me, that threatening to destroy my life would finally force me to surrender and fund his criminal lifestyle one last time. But he had absolutely no power left. He was a broke, unemployed felon screaming at a camera, while the real power was already sitting quietly in the email inbox of the billionaire standing right behind him. I didn't yell back. I didn't justify myself, and I certainly didn't beg for forgiveness. I simply leaned back in my desk chair, looked directly into my webcam, and smiled. I reached forward and finally pressed the small microphone icon on my screen, unmuting my audio. The sudden transmission of my quiet office background noise cut sharply through the chaotic screaming filling the Italian courtyard. My father froze, staring down at the phone propped against the marble planter. Connor stopped thrashing against the grip of the Italian officers, waiting, finally, for me to surrender. He expected me to be crying. He expected me to be terrified by his threats to destroy my career and burn my entire life to the ground. Instead, my calm, steady voice echoed out of the phone speaker, amplifying clearly across the silent patio. "I am not going to press any buttons, Connor," I said, my tone perfectly conversational and entirely devoid of distress. "And you are not going to destroy my career because you are never going to work in the corporate world again. I didn't just sit here quietly listening to your pathetic threats for the last 20 minutes. I used that time productively. While you were busy threatening me and lying to your future father-in-law about a routing error, I initiated a secondary protocol on my communication software. I merged this FaceTime call with another highly secure line." The silence in the courtyard deepened into something almost physical. My mother slowly lowered her hands from her face, her eyes widening with sudden apprehension. Nia took a step back, her bridal robe looking increasingly out of place against what was quickly becoming a crime scene. Connor swallowed hard, his confident facade fully crumbling as the weight of my words began to sink in. "Merge the call with who?" my father demanded, his voice trembling slightly as he instinctively took a step toward the dropped phone. "Who else is on this line right now, Gwen?" I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I yielded the floor to the silent listener who had been meticulously documenting every single word spoken over the past 15 minutes. "Go ahead, Agent Miller," I said clearly into my microphone. "The floor is entirely yours." A new voice suddenly projected from the phone speaker, entirely distinct from my own, deep, authoritative, carrying the unmistakable cadence of seasoned law enforcement. "Good evening," the voice announced, instantly commanding the attention of every single person in the courtyard. "My name is Special Agent David Miller. I am calling from the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI's New York field office. I have been officially monitoring this merged line for approximately 15 minutes, at the direct request of the primary victim, Ms. Gwen." My father physically recoiled, as if the phone had just burst into flames in front of him. Brenda let out a strangled gasp, her knees visibly buckling beneath her. Connor turned the color of freshly poured concrete. The Italian police officers, instantly recognizing the authoritative tone and the mention of the Federal Bureau, tightened their grip on his arms and looked intently down at the glowing screen on the ground. Agent Miller didn't pause to let anyone recover from the shock. He delivered his statement with the cold, clinical precision of a federal prosecutor laying out an airtight indictment. "Over the course of this monitored call," he continued, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the villa, "I have recorded the suspect, Connor, actively threatening the victim in an attempt to extort the authorization of fraudulent funds. I have also recorded multiple individuals, presumably the suspect's parents, actively attempting to coerce the victim into validating a forged document and covering up a federal crime involving interstate wire fraud and aggravated identity theft." The air seemed to get sucked entirely out of the courtyard. This was no longer a messy family argument over wedding expenses. This was no longer some desperate attempt to maintain a fake billionaire persona in front of a wealthy bride. This was a live federal investigation, and my parents had just been officially recorded acting as active co-conspirators. They had openly admitted, on tape, to knowing the loan was fraudulent, and had aggressively pressured me into lying to a bank in order to protect the man at the center of it all. "Mr. Connor," Agent Miller stated, his tone completely devoid of sympathy, "you are currently detained by international authorities, but you should be fully aware that a federal warrant for your arrest is already being drafted in the Southern District of New York. The financial transfers you attempted to execute constitute severe federal offenses. Extorting a witness across international lines carries additional mandatory sentencing." Connor opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out at all. The charismatic entrepreneur who had so confidently spun lies just moments earlier was entirely gone now, replaced by a terrified criminal staring straight into the abyss of a lengthy federal prison sentence. The senior Italian officer standing over the dropped phone slowly lowered his stack of printed transaction records. He had spent years dealing with wealthy tourists trying to talk their way out of local trouble, but the sudden presence of an American federal agent shifted the entire atmosphere of the courtyard instantly. The officer crouched down, bringing his face closer to the phone, leaning against the marble planter. "Officer, this is Special Agent Miller," the voice projected clearly from the device. "I understand you currently have the suspect detained. Can you please confirm your jurisdiction and agency?" The Italian officer cleared his throat, his posture stiffening even as he crouched. "I am Captain Rossi, with the Carabinieri of the Lombardy region," he replied in his thick accent. "We hold this man for grand theft and for defrauding local hospitality businesses. He claims his corporate accounts are locked due to an administrative routing error caused by his sister." Agent Miller didn't hesitate for even a second. "Captain Rossi, I am officially confirming that there is no corporate account, and there was never any routing error. The suspect, Connor, is not an executive of any financial firm. He illegally obtained his sister's social security number and forged her signature to secure a fraudulent, unsecured loan of $150,000. The credit cards he used to pay your local vendors are directly tied to that stolen identity. The funds were automatically frozen by American banking security protocols precisely because they are the proceeds of a severe federal crime. He is actively attempting to flee international debts using a fabricated identity." The absolute finality in Agent Miller's voice echoed off the ancient stone walls of the villa. There was no room left for interpretation, no loophole for my father to exploit, and no charming lie left that could possibly save my brother now. The official confirmation from the FBI hung heavily in the humid night air, completely obliterating the billionaire CEO illusion Connor had spent months so carefully constructing. Captain Rossi nodded slowly. He straightened up, his expression hardening as he looked down at my brother. The last shred of professional courtesy he had extended toward a supposedly wealthy American tourist vanished entirely. He motioned to his partner, who immediately tightened the plastic cuffs around Connor's wrists, making him wince sharply in pain. Connor's confident facade shattered completely. The arrogant smirk he'd worn since arriving in Italy dissolved into an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving erratically beneath his ruined tuxedo shirt. He gasped for air, eyes darting frantically around the courtyard like a trapped animal searching for an impossible escape route. He looked at Nia, silently begging for her family's wealth to shield him, but she only took another horrified step backward. He looked at my father, the man who had enabled and protected him his entire life, but Richard stood completely paralyzed, staring blankly down at the stone patio. "I can't breathe," Connor wheezed, his knees buckling slightly as the officers held him upright. "I can't go to federal prison. Mom, you have to do something, please. Do something." But my mother was in no position to save anyone. The sheer magnitude of the situation had finally pierced through her deep layers of denial. She realized, all at once, that her golden child wasn't just facing a minor embarrassment. He was facing years inside a federal penitentiary, and she herself had just been recorded by an FBI agent actively conspiring to help him commit financial extortion. The blood drained completely from Brenda's face, leaving her skin a ghastly shade of gray. She let out a weak, high-pitched gasp, clutching her chest with both trembling hands. Her knees gave out entirely, and she collapsed heavily into a wrought iron patio chair, her head falling back as she hovered right at the edge of fainting. She stared up at the dark Italian sky, taking short, shallow breaths, completely unable to process the total collapse of her perfect family image. My father rushed to her side, his own hands shaking violently as he tried to steady her. He looked genuinely terrified now. The aggressive, commanding patriarch who had just threatened to disown me and destroy my reputation was entirely gone, replaced by a man finally realizing that the federal government doesn't particularly care about neighborhood social status or family loyalty. He had actively participated in a recorded extortion attempt spanning international lines, and he clearly understood that Agent Miller was already building a case against him too. I watched them completely unravel on my monitor. For 34 years, they had demanded I sacrifice my own well-being to protect Connor from the consequences of his actions. They had expected me to quietly absorb the financial and emotional damage he constantly inflicted on everyone around him. Tonight, finally, they were forced to face the brutal, unavoidable reality of what they had built. As my mother gasped in her patio chair and my father stood frozen beside her, a sharp chime cut through the silence. The notification bell echoed loudly from the sleek silver iPad resting in Thomas Carter's hands, the one a hotel concierge had rushed out to him just moments before the FBI bombshell dropped. Thomas didn't look up right away. He simply raised the tablet, adjusted the gold-rimmed reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, and tapped the glowing screen. He had opened my email. I sat perfectly still in Manhattan, watching the automotive tycoon process the digital execution of my brother in real time. Thomas swiped his finger across the glass, opening the attached PDF dossier I had compiled. The courtyard remained agonizingly quiet, save for my mother's ragged breathing. Thomas spent a full 60 seconds reading in absolute silence. You could practically see his formidable intellect absorbing the hard data, verifying the official county seals, connecting every devastating dot. His expression didn't twist into rage. Instead, it hardened into a mask of pure, terrifying clarity. He was a man who had built a billion-dollar empire on the ability to read complex contracts, and he recognized a bulletproof audit the moment he saw one. Nia took a hesitant step toward him, her hands trembling as she clutched the lapels of her bridal robe. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What does it say? Who is emailing you right now?" Thomas slowly lowered his reading glasses, letting them hang from the gold chain around his neck. He looked directly at Connor, who was now openly weeping while restrained by the carabinieri. "The email is from Gwen," his deep voice announced, carrying a lethal, booming resonance that demanded total submission from everyone present. "It's a comprehensive forensic audit of your fiancé's entire financial portfolio, and it appears the man you were about to marry is not a self-made corporate titan at all. He is an unemployed, destitute criminal who has been living entirely off the charity and stolen credit of the very sister he just called mentally unstable." Nia gasped, shaking her head in frantic denial. "No, that's impossible," she stammered, pointing a manicured finger toward Connor. "He showed you the corporate lease. He showed us the tax returns." "He showed us amateur forgeries," Thomas corrected sharply, raising the iPad so she could see the glowing screen. "According to these official federal background checks and verified tax records, Connor hasn't held a legitimate job in over 36 months. He doesn't own a forensic accounting firm. He doesn't sit on any corporate board. His actual credit score is an abysmal 420. He is completely broke." Connor squeezed his eyes shut, turning his face away from the blinding light of the truth. But Thomas was just getting started. He scrolled to the next page of the dossier, determined to expose every remaining lie. 48 hours ago, while you two were enjoying a luxury hotel suite in Milan," Thomas read aloud, his voice dripping with disgust, "Connor illegally obtained his sister's social security number. He submitted a fraudulent application for an unsecured personal loan of $150,000. The IP address on that application matches, exactly, the wireless network of the Milan hotel. He used that stolen money to fund this entire wedding. The checks bounced because his sister's automated fraud protection flagged the federal crime in progress. My father tried to speak, raising a weak hand. "Thomas, please," he croaked. "We can explain everything. It was just a desperate mistake." Thomas turned his piercing gaze toward my father, shutting him down instantly. "Don't insult my intelligence, Richard," he snapped. "You are just as complicit. And you're also completely homeless, because the final document in this file is a certified property deed." Thomas swiped to the last page. "To secure this fraudulent loan, your son submitted a forged power of attorney in order to leverage a second mortgage on your colonial house in New Jersey. But he couldn't legally do that because you don't own that house. Gwen bought it out of foreclosure 5 years ago. Your son just tried to put a lien on property that legally belongs to the very woman you all just threatened to disown." The full magnitude of the betrayal finally hit Nia with crushing force. Her mouth fell open in sheer horror, her jaw literally dropping as she stared at the sniveling, handcuffed man she had almost pledged her life to. The billionaire illusion was completely dead now, replaced by the ugly, undeniable reality of a pathological con artist who had risked his own parents' shelter for a taste of borrowed luxury. He had manipulated her heart and her family's trust to orchestrate the single most elaborate financial scam of his pathetic life. The heavy silence that followed Thomas's declaration was shattered by the sharp, stinging crack of a slap. Nia stepped forward, her hand moving so fast it blurred on my monitor, and struck Connor directly across his tear-streaked cheek. The sound cracked through the courtyard, making even the Italian officers flinch. Connor recoiled, his head snapping sideways, the plastic cuffs preventing him from defending himself at all. "You lied to me!" Nia shrieked, her voice now completely stripped of its earlier aristocratic elegance. "You looked me in the eyes every single day and you lied to me. You made me introduce you to my father. You made me bring you into my home. You made me sign a prenuptial agreement to protect assets that never even existed. You're nothing but a disgusting, broke criminal who tried to steal my family's money." Connor desperately shook his head, tears streaming down his face as he tried to salvage the completely unsalvageable. "Nia, please listen to me," he sobbed, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "I did it all for us. I wanted to give you the wedding you deserved. I was going to pay my sister back the second I started working for your father. It was an investment in our future. You have to believe me. I just wanted to be worthy of you." "Worthy of me?" Nia screamed, stepping even closer, her face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. "You stole from your own sister and tried to make your parents homeless just to buy a tuxedo and a boat ride. You're not a businessman. You're a parasite. You actually thought my father would just hand you a vice president title while you quietly paid off your felony debts with his money. You're completely pathetic. I would rather die than marry a fraud like you." My mother, who had been gasping in the patio chair, suddenly found one final surge of defensive adrenaline. Seeing her precious golden child verbally annihilated by his former bride snapped her abruptly out of her stupor. She staggered to her feet, her face flushed with desperate, irrational anger. "Don't you dare speak to my son that way," Brenda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Nia. "He loved you. He bent over backwards to impress you and your snobby family. If you and your father weren't so obsessed with wealth and status, he never would have felt the need to borrow that money in the first place. This is your fault, for having such ridiculous expectations. You drove him to this." Nia slowly turned her head, her dark eyes locking onto my mother with a look of absolute, lethal contempt. "My fault?" she repeated, her voice dropping into a dangerous, icy register. "Your unemployed son commits identity theft and federal wire fraud, and you have the audacity to blame me? You're just as delusional as he is." No wonder he turned out to be a pathological liar. He learned it from a mother who covers up his crimes and blames everyone else for his massive failures. You are a terrible mother, and your entire family is an absolute joke. My father stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. That's enough, Richard barked, trying weakly to reclaim some shred of patriarchal authority. You will not insult my wife. Thomas Carter immediately stepped squarely between my father and Naya, his massive frame entirely blocking Richard from advancing any further. You don't get to give orders here, Richard, Thomas warned, his voice rumbling like an approaching thunderstorm. Your wife just blamed my daughter for your son's felony. You've spent this entire evening lying to my face, covering for a thief, and actively conspiring against your own daughter in New York. You are a disgrace of a man. You have absolutely no authority left, no moral ground to stand on, and as of this moment, no home to return to. The screaming match erupted into total, uncontrollable chaos. My mother shrieked insults at Nia, calling her a spoiled princess. Nia screamed back, calling my parents enabling criminals. Connor continued sobbing hysterically, begging anyone within earshot to listen to his pathetic excuses. Richard and Thomas stood chest to chest, exchanging furious, heated threats. I sat alone in my dark apartment, watching the spectacular collapse unfold on my monitor. The phone resting against the marble planter captured every single second of their devastating downfall. They had spent their entire lives projecting a flawless image of superiority, constantly making me feel like the defective family member. Now the mask had been completely ripped away, exposing the ugly, toxic reality they had fought so desperately to hide. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. Oh, I felt simply an overwhelming sense of total vindication. Thomas Carter had clearly entertained enough of the chaotic circus. He stepped back abruptly from my father, raising his hands in a gesture of complete dismissal. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored dinner jacket, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles caused by his proximity to my enraged, red-faced father. Enough, Thomas boomed, his voice slicing cleanly through the cacophony of shrieks and insults like a blade. The courtyard instantly fell dead silent. My mother clamped her mouth shut, and Nia took a step backward, positioning herself firmly behind her father. Thomas turned his attention entirely away from my pathetic family and looked directly at Captain Rossi, who had been standing by patiently with his officers. "Captain," he said, his tone shifting back into the calm, authoritative cadence of a corporate titan conducting business. "I formally apologize for this unacceptable disturbance on behalf of my own family. We have absolutely zero relation to this man or his associates. They are not our guests, and we hold no financial or legal responsibility whatsoever for his fraudulent actions. Please execute your duties, do your job, and remove this criminal from our venue immediately." Captain Rossi offered a curt nod of appreciation. He signaled his partner, and together they seized Connor by both arms. The reality of Thomas Carter's dismissal hit my brother like a physical blow. The billionaire's safety net was completely gone. "Wait, Thomas, please!" Connor screamed, his voice pitching upward into a terrified, almost animal wail. "I can fix this. I can explain the paperwork. Just give me one more chance." But Thomas didn't even grace him with a backward glance. The officers dragged Connor roughly across the cobblestone courtyard toward the waiting transport van. Connor dug the heels of his expensive leather shoes into the stone, frantically trying to resist the overwhelming physical force of the authorities. The plastic cuffs dug deeply into his wrists, but he fought like a drowning man clinging to anything within reach. "Mom!" he shrieked, twisting his head to look back toward the patio. "Mom, don't let them take me. Call the embassy. Call a lawyer. Mom, help me." Brenda lunged forward, letting out a horrific, ear-piercing scream. She reached out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab at the torn fabric of his custom tuxedo. But the second Italian officer stepped easily into her path, holding up a firm hand and warning her in strict English to step back or face immediate arrest for interfering with an active police investigation. My mother collapsed back into the wrought iron chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. My father stood frozen, watching the absolute destruction of his legacy play out beneath the harsh, pulsing glare of the red and blue strobe lights. Thomas turned to his daughter, his expression softening only slightly. "Nia," he said, gently but firmly, "go upstairs to the penthouse suite right now. Gather your things and pack your bags. We're leaving this island tonight. The wedding is officially, completely canceled. I'll have the concierge prep our private jet for an immediate departure back to Atlanta. Don't leave a single item behind." Nia nodded, pulling her silk bridal robe tightly around her shivering frame. She cast one final disgusted look at the hysterical man she had almost married, fully shedding any lingering attachment to the pathetic fraud he turned out to be. "Yes, Daddy," she whispered quickly, turning on her heel and marching toward the grand staircase of the villa without looking back even once. She was walking away from the wreckage of my brother's lies, retreating into the impenetrable fortress of her real wealth, leaving my fake billionaire brother to face the consequences of his actions entirely alone. The Italian officers finally muscled Connor to the back of the heavy transport van. They shoved him forward, forcing his head down as they pushed him violently into the dark metal cage of the vehicle. His desperate, agonizing screams echoed from inside the metal box, begging for our mother, begging for Nia, and finally begging for me to save him. But his pleas were abruptly silenced as Captain Rossi slammed the heavy steel doors shut. The metallic clang signaled the absolute final end of his extravagant charade. The officer walked around to the driver's side, climbed in, and ignited the engine. The flashing blue lights swept across the stone arches of the villa one last time as the van slowly pulled out of the grand driveway, carrying the golden child toward a cold, foreign jail cell. The courtyard descended into an eerie, suffocating silence. Thomas walked away, disappearing into the hotel lobby without another word. The remaining hotel staff quietly retreated into the shadows. My parents were left completely alone in the center of the dark patio. For a long while, neither of them moved. They simply stood there, surrounded by the extravagant floral arrangements and imported silk drapery that Connor had tried to buy with my stolen identity. The gentle breeze drifting off Lake Como rustled softly through the leaves of the olive trees, but the luxurious atmosphere had vanished entirely, replaced by the cold, hard reality of their absolute ruin. I watched through the dropped phone as the heavy glass doors of the hotel lobby suddenly slid open. Thomas Carter marched out, closely followed by Nia and a team of private security guards carrying their matched designer luggage. Nia had changed out of her silk bridal robe and was now dressed in a stark black travel suit, looking more like she was heading to a funeral than walking away from her own wedding. She didn't even glance in my parents' direction. She walked straight past them, chin held high, and climbed into the back of a waiting black SUV. Thomas paused just before getting into the car. He looked at my father one final time. His expression no longer held any anger, only profound, undisguised pity. "Good luck," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "You're going to need it." He climbed into the vehicle and the heavy door slammed shut behind him. The convoy of luxury cars pulled away from the villa, heading directly toward the private aviation terminal at the airport. They were flying back to Atlanta, leaving the entire nightmare behind them for good. My parents were now completely abandoned, but their nightmare was only just beginning. The hotel manager stepped out onto the patio, flanked by two large security guards. He was a tall, imposing Italian man, clearly furious about the bounced checks and the police presence that had now ruined the reputation of his elite establishment. "Mr. and Mrs.," he said, his English heavily accented but perfectly clear, "the accounts are frozen. The wedding is cancelled. Your luxury suites are no longer paid for. I need you to gather your belongings and vacate the premises immediately. You have 20 minutes before I have my security team escort you off the property." My mother let out a fresh sob, clutching her chest. "But where are we supposed to go?" she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "It's the middle of the night. We don't have a car. Our son is in jail." "That is not my problem," the manager replied, crossing his arms over his chest. "This is a private hotel, not a charity. 20 minutes. I will make sure you leave." The manager turned on his heel and walked back inside, leaving the security guards standing at the door with their arms crossed. My father stood frozen, his face pale and slick with sweat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, his hands shaking as he opened it. I already knew exactly what was inside. Nothing. My parents had flown to Italy relying entirely on the illusion of Connor's wealth. They had assumed their billionaire CEO son would cover every single expense: the flights, the meals, the accommodations. They had even maxed out their own modest credit cards just to buy formal wear for the weekend. Now they were stranded in a foreign country with no hotel room, no rental car, and absolutely no money for a plane ticket home. Slowly, my father's eyes drifted downward. He saw his phone still resting against the marble planter. He remembered the FaceTime call was still active. He remembered that the daughter he had just threatened to disown was still watching every single second of their humiliating downfall play out. He dropped to his knees on the hard cobblestone and reached for the phone. His face filled my screen. The arrogance, the condescension, the cruel ultimatums, all of it was completely gone now. He looked like a broken, terrified old man. "Gwen," he whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "Gwen, are you still there? Are you... Please tell me you're still there." "I'm here, Dad," I replied, my voice calm and completely detached. "You have to help us," my mother cried out, crawling across the patio to press her face close to his against the screen. "We have absolutely nothing left, Gwen. They're throwing us out onto the street. We don't have money for a hotel. We don't have money for a flight. We can't even afford a taxi to the airport. Please, Gwen, you have to buy us plane tickets. Just get us back to New York. We'll do whatever you want. We'll apologize. We'll go to counseling. Just don't leave us here." I stared back at their completely terrified, pathetic faces. They were literally on their knees, begging for my financial help. But their sudden willingness to apologize, to suddenly attend family counseling, meant absolutely nothing to me. It wasn't genuine remorse. It was simply the panicked reaction of two selfish people who had finally run out of other people's money and could no longer manipulate their way out of disaster. I leaned closer to the microphone. "No," I said calmly. "I am not buying you plane tickets. I am not paying for a hotel. I am not bailing you out of this nightmare." My father let out a desperate, choked gasp. "Gwen, please," he begged, his hands trembling violently around the phone. "You can't just abandon us here in a foreign country with no resources. We are your parents. We made a terrible mistake, but we're still your family. We'll pay you back every single cent if you just help us get home safely tonight." I shook my head, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the man who had threatened, just 20 minutes earlier, to completely destroy my reputation and my career. "You didn't make a simple mistake, Dad," I corrected him, my voice echoing sharply across the empty Italian courtyard. "You made a conscious, calculated choice. You stood there and listened to Connor lie straight to Thomas Carter's face about owning my accounting firm. You actively covered the camera lens so I couldn't expose his federal crimes to the authorities. And most importantly, you knew he had forged a legal power of attorney to leverage a second mortgage on the New Jersey house just to pay for this fake billionaire wedding." My mother started sobbing even louder, pounding her fist against the hard cobblestone. "We didn't think it would go this far," she wailed, her face red and streaked with mascara. "We thought he'd just get the temporary loan and pay it back after the honeymoon. We never wanted you to actually lose the house, Gwen. We thought it was just a technicality." "You're lying," I said, my voice dropping into a harsh, unforgiving register. "You didn't care whether I lost the house, because for the last 5 years you've been living there pretending you still owned it yourselves. I saved you from severe foreclosure. I bought that property directly from the bank so you wouldn't end up thrown out onto the street. I let you live there completely rent-free, and in return, you actively helped your golden child try to steal the very roof over your own heads, just to protect his fragile ego and impress a wealthy family you barely knew." My parents stared at me, utterly silenced by the brutal, undeniable truth. "And because you chose to act as active accomplices in his real estate fraud," I continued, refusing to break eye contact with the camera, "there are now severe consequences for what you did tonight. I am officially terminating our housing arrangement. You are no longer my tenants. I am legally evicting you from the New Jersey house." My father stared at the screen, his eyes wide with sheer, unmistakable horror. "You can't do that," he whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic wheeze. "Where will we live, Gwen? We don't have any savings. We don't have anywhere else to go. You're punishing us for his crimes." "You punished yourselves," I fired back immediately. "You have exactly 30 days from tomorrow morning to completely vacate the premises. My real estate lawyer will be posting the official 30-day eviction notice on the front door by noon tomorrow. If your belongings aren't entirely removed by the deadline, I will have the county sheriff change the locks and put everything you own out on the curb. I will not grant a single extension, under any circumstances." Seeing that begging was no longer working, my mother's true toxic nature instantly resurfaced. She stopped crying and glared directly into the phone. "You are a cold, heartless monster," she hissed, venom dripping from every single word. "You are intentionally leaving your elderly parents stranded in Italy just to prove a point. You are going to burn in hell for treating your own blood this way." I smiled, feeling a massive, heavy weight finally lift off my shoulders. "You wanted to gamble with my property to buy your son a luxury boat ride and impress a billionaire," I stated firmly. "Well, you just lost that gamble entirely. You can figure out how to get back to America on your own without my credit cards to bail you out. You have 30 days. I'd strongly suggest you start packing immediately." I reached forward and permanently ended the call, leaving them sitting there in the dark. 3 weeks passed since that fateful night in Italy. The massive international scandal had completely decimated the fragile illusion my family had spent decades carefully building. Connor never experienced any miraculous last-minute rescue. Without massive wealth or my stolen credit to shield him, my brother was forced to navigate the slow, unforgiving Italian legal system entirely on his own. He spent 21 agonizing days sitting in a cramped foreign holding cell, waiting for his diplomatic paperwork to process. Then the extradition order was finally approved by European authorities, and he was placed on a commercial flight back to the United States, surrounded by armed federal marshals. He landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport on a rainy Tuesday morning. There were no flashing cameras, no adoring crowds waiting to welcome the successful chief executive home. Instead, Special Agent Miller and a team of federal agents were already standing at the arrival gate. The moment Connor stepped off the jet bridge, he was immediately taken into federal custody. They stripped him of his expensive tailored clothes and placed him in a standard orange jumpsuit. He was formally charged with aggravated identity theft, interstate wire fraud, and international extortion. The billionaire entrepreneur was now simply federal inmate number 7492. My parents experienced a completely different but equally devastating downfall of their own. After I hung up the phone that night, the Italian hotel manager kept his word. His private security team physically escorted my parents off the luxury property, leaving them standing on the dark cobblestone street with nothing but their designer luggage. They spent their first night sleeping on hard plastic chairs in a local train station. They quickly discovered that their arrogant attitudes and aggressive demands meant absolutely nothing without money to back them up. To survive, they were eventually forced to walk into a pawn shop in Milan and sell off their most prized possessions. My father had to hand over his vintage gold Rolex, and my mother had to part with her diamond-encrusted Cartier bracelet. They sold the luxury items for a fraction of their real value, just to scrape together enough cash for 2 one-way tickets back to America. The parents who had once bragged about flying on a private jet were forced to sit in cramped middle seats, in the very last row of a discount economy airline, right beside the lavatory. They spent 14 hours flying across the Atlantic surrounded by crying infants and stale recycled air, completely humiliated and utterly defeated. When they finally landed in New Jersey, they couldn't even afford a town car to pick them up. They had to take a cheap, heavily dented taxi back to the suburban neighborhood they had once ruled with such arrogant pride. They arrived at the colonial house completely exhausted, expecting to walk inside and somehow resume their normal, comfortable lives. They had assumed my 30-day eviction notice was just an angry threat I would eventually forget about. They were entirely, completely wrong. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, my parents dragged their heavy suitcases up the long concrete driveway and immediately noticed something was drastically different. The front lawn was covered in heavy-duty cardboard moving boxes. I hadn't waited around for them to slowly pack their belongings at their own leisure. I had hired a professional moving company and a local legal representative to facilitate the immediate packing of the property. Dozens of perfectly sealed brown boxes were stacked neatly across the front porch. My father rushed up the porch steps and frantically jammed his brass key into the front door. It didn't turn. The locks had already been changed completely by my real estate lawyer. An official, bright yellow legal notice was securely taped to the front door, confirming the eviction process was already actively underway. They were officially locked out of the very home they had tried to steal from me. My mother dropped her designer handbag onto the wooden porch and stared up at the towering wall of cardboard boxes. The reality of their situation finally crushed the last remaining ounce of her delusion. They had absolutely no money. They had absolutely no home. Their golden child was sitting in a federal detention center, facing a decade behind bars. And the daughter they had treated like a disposable bank account had finally, completely cut them off. My father slumped against the locked door, sliding down until he was sitting on the porch, staring blankly at the quiet suburban street. They had gambled everything to protect a lie, and they had lost everything in the process. There was no one left to call. There was no one left to manipulate. The devastating consequences of their own toxic actions had finally, fully arrived. While my father remained paralyzed on the concrete porch of the house he no longer owned, my mother refused to accept total defeat. Brenda had spent 34 years manipulating me with tears and weaponized guilt, and she genuinely believed she could do it one final time. Exactly 4 days after their utterly humiliating return from Italy, she boarded a train directly into Manhattan. Gone were the designer jewelry and expensive silk blouses. She looked completely disheveled now, her hair unkempt, her posture sagging under the crushing weight of her new reality. She marched through the revolving glass doors of my corporate office building in the financial district, expecting to bypass the front desk entirely and storm straight into my accounting department. She planned to create a massive public scene, crying hysterically in front of my colleagues until I surrendered out of sheer embarrassment. She thought public humiliation would force me to finally open my wallet and save them. but she had severely underestimated just how completely I had secured my perimeter. Before she could take 10 steps across the polished marble floor toward the elevator banks, two broad-shouldered security guards stepped directly into her path. I had explicitly anticipated her arrival. I had already provided the front desk with a high-resolution photograph of her face, along with strict instructions to deny her entry under any circumstances whatsoever. Brenda began to shout, pointing a frantic finger toward the ceiling and demanding to see her daughter. The head of security immediately keyed his radio, notifying me that an unauthorized individual was causing a disturbance in the main lobby. I didn't panic. I simply saved my spreadsheet, stood up from my desk, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. When the silver doors slid open, I saw her struggling against the guards, her voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. She looked small, desperate, and entirely powerless. I walked calmly across the lobby, my heels clicking sharply against the marble, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. "Gwen!" she cried out the moment she saw me, immediately launching into her rehearsed performance. She forcefully shoved past the security guards, tears rapidly welling in her eyes as she reached out to grab my arms. "Please, you have to call off the lawyers. Your father is sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a cheap motel. Connor is calling us collect from a federal prison phone, crying because he's terrified. We have absolutely nothing left. You made your point. You won. Now please, just be the bigger person and help your family." I stopped exactly 3 feet away from her, keeping my hands firmly clasped at my sides, refusing to let her touch me. I didn't flinch, and I didn't offer her a single ounce of comfort. Her tears, which used to trigger a severe panic attack in my chest, now meant absolutely nothing to me at all. I looked at her with the cold detachment of an auditor reviewing a fraudulent tax return. "I am not here to be the bigger person, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her theatrical sobbing with surgical precision. "I'm here to deliver your final paperwork." I reached into my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed vanilla folder, holding it out toward her. She stared at it, her hands trembling as she slowly took it from my grasp. She opened the flap, her eyes darting across the dense legal jargon printed on the first page. "That is a court-ordered injunction," I explained, making sure my voice carried loud enough for the security guards to clearly witness the exchange. "It's a legally binding restraining order. You and Dad are strictly prohibited from contacting me by phone, email, or in person. You are not allowed within 500 feet of my apartment, and you are permanently banned from this building. If you attempt to ambush me at my workplace again, the guards have explicit permission to arrest you for criminal trespassing and harassment." Her jaw dropped, the remaining color draining rapidly from her shocked face, but the hits weren't over yet. "Turn to the second page," I commanded coldly. She flipped the heavy parchment, staring blankly down at a bill of sale. "I officially sold the New Jersey property yesterday to a corporate real estate developer," I stated, delivering the final devastating blow to her shattered ego. "The house will be completely demolished next week to make room for a commercial parking lot. Your little neighborhood kingdom is gone forever. You chose to protect a criminal, and this is the final, absolute consequence of your toxic loyalty. Have a nice life, Brenda." Without waiting for any response, I turned my back on her and walked confidently into the elevator, completely severing the parasitic tie between us for good. The steel doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of her frantic, muffled protests once and for all. As the elevator began its smooth ascent back to my floor, I felt a profound, unfamiliar sensation wash over my entire body. It wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't the familiar, suffocating anxiety that usually followed any interaction with my parents. It was simply pure, unadulterated silence. For 34 years, my mind had been held hostage by a constant, chaotic frequency of demands, guilt trips, and manufactured emergencies. I had been conditioned to brace for the next financial disaster, the next tearful phone call, the next unhinged scheme to save my brother from his own catastrophic choices. But as I stepped back into my accounting department and sat down at my desk, that frequency was permanently switched off. The parasitic tie was severed. The psychological warfare was officially, finally over. Fast forward a few weeks, and that silence has become my beautiful new reality. I'm currently sitting in the living room of my Manhattan apartment, holding a warm ceramic mug of freshly brewed coffee. The morning sunlight streams in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a soft golden glow across the hardwood floors. There are no frantic text messages blowing up my phone. There are no voicemails from blocked numbers threatening my career or demanding my savings. The absolute stillness of my home stands in stark, glorious contrast to that dark cobblestone courtyard in Italy, where my family's entire empire of lies finally collapsed and burned to the ground. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark roast, and look out at the sprawling city skyline. I finally, completely own my space, my money, and my life. The legal fallout from Connor's international crime spree moved swiftly, entirely unhindered by my parents' desperate attempts to spin some new narrative. Without my bank accounts to fund a high-powered defense attorney, Connor was assigned a heavily overworked public defender. Faced with the overwhelming bulletproof mountain of digital evidence I had handed over to Special Agent Miller, the prosecution offered absolutely no leniency. Connor ultimately accepted a harsh plea deal to avoid a lengthy, humiliating federal trial. He is currently serving a mandatory minimum sentence of 7 years in a medium-security federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. There are no more custom-tailored tuxedos or luxury boat rentals in his immediate future. He spends his days working in the prison laundry facility, earning pennies an hour, finally forced to understand the actual value of hard work for the first time in his life. As for Richard and Brenda, their reality turned out to be equally bleak. The New Jersey house was completely leveled, replaced by a massive concrete foundation for the new commercial parking structure. Stripped of their stolen suburban kingdom and the facade of wealth they had worshipped for so long, they were forced to relocate to a tiny, run-down one-bedroom apartment in a sprawling complex on the outskirts of the city. They now work minimum-wage retail jobs just to afford basic groceries, completely alienated from the elite social circles they once desperately tried to impress. They have no contact with the Carter family, no contact with their golden child, and absolutely no contact with me. They gambled their entire livelihood on a sociopathic liar, and in the end, the house always wins. Sitting here now, I feel absolutely no remorse. Society conditions us, heavily and persistently, to believe that blood is always thicker than water, that we must endlessly forgive and unconditionally support the people who share our genetics, no matter how deeply they abuse our trust. We are taught, over and over, to be the bigger person, to silently absorb the financial and emotional blows just to keep the peace. But I finally understood that keeping the peace for them meant living in a constant, exhausting state of war with myself. They never wanted a daughter. They wanted a compliant, silent ATM machine to fund their delusions indefinitely. I didn't destroy this family. I simply stopped funding the illusion of one. And the moment I stopped paying the admission fee, the entire theater production shut down almost instantly. I chose my own financial survival, my own mental health, and my own hard-earned career over their toxic, parasitic version of loyalty. I chose the cold, hard truth over a comfortable, expensive lie, and it remains, without question, the single best decision I have ever made in my entire life. Please share your own thoughts down below with me. I read every single story, and I know I'm far from the only person who has survived this kind of nightmare. It's time we stop feeling guilty for protecting ourselves. Have you ever had to choose between your own financial survival and family loyalty? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. And remember, DNA doesn't give anyone a free pass to your bank account.